Hey guys, so we've had a couple weekends worth of regional level events now post Legacy of Destruction and of course post banlist. So as usual, I want to provide a recap of some of the decks that have topped across all the various different regions in the TCG and some other sort of breakdowns as well. And definitely before we continue, big shout out to my sponsors. Go check out those discount codes for Yu-Gi-Oh singles as well as sleeves and some other supplies all in the description down below. And of course, I could never do these videos efficiently without the help of Ivan as well as YGOProduct.com, who work very hard in terms of maintaining all of the topping information from across the different tournaments. So this is sort of what the breakdown looks like for the 2 weekends worth of events post Legacy of Destruction. You know, unfortunately, Pure Snake Eye is still the most dominant deck. The ban list didn't do too much, unfortunately. But Tenpai Dragon is kind of like the new one in the mix, of course, kind of a new strategy. Introduced in Legacy of Destruction, they're actually going to get further support in Infinite Forbidden as well, which of course will be legal for NAWCQ, and so I'm sure a lot of people are already preparing for that at this point. So Tenpai Dragon, I think especially in the most recent weekend, have really picked it up. I know at the beginning I sort of talked about this in the meta tier list video that I posted just not that long ago, but how, you know, a lot of people were kind of on the fence about Tenpai Dragons in terms of being very hit and miss in terms of how it wins games, and it's kind of true, but at the same time, clearly, it's actually getting some results still. You saw Fire King, your Voiceless Voice, they got some a bit more support. Branded Despia didn't get any direct support, but at the very least didn't get Gimmick Lock banned, which is still very strong, of course. And then you have still Kashtira, Shifter deck. It is doing well, regional level wise, in the most recent meta tier list. I know there were some comments about that. I kind of got categorized under, like, for example, something like Flunder, because Flunder did top the YCS after all, and so there was a bit more weighting there. Melodious is another new one. Well, I shouldn't really say new in terms of it's an archetype that existed before, but you know, just recently came back into meta relevancy. So I think it's pretty cool with that one, really under the radar in terms of as we entered this Legacy of Destruction format. I don't think that many people were playing, or rather talking about it, but as we entered the format, it kind of just came out swinging and did pretty well. There's Pearly, they got Delicious to do. There's something like Labyrinth that's actually still doing pretty decently. I mean, Jesse Cotton, for example, he topped 32 the most recent YCS with Labyrinth 2, and then, you know, there's like Runic Stun, unfortunately, and just a bunch of decks and other. I should also note that this pie chart was based on 253 decks from 32 regionals, and because there were 33 regionals in total in that span, that means, you know, Ivan as well as YGOProduct.com, they were able to track down 96% of the topping decks for these 2 weekends, which is super impressive. In terms of some of the other decks that were topping, of course, you know, you have Centurion. They did get some new support as well from Legacy Destruction. Really meaningful support. They can play under Shifter better. And they're going to get more support down the line as well. You know what? Still, maybe not as many tops as maybe one may have expected, but still pretty solid. Same thing can be said for Ubel. They got notable support as well in Legacy Destruction. Of course, they're still waiting on that fusion to come out. And then at that point, they're going to do very well. You have something like Unchained, pure Unchained at that, not just with like Ubel or with Labyrinth. That's actually kind of picking up in this current format so far. Flunder, I kind of already talked about this. Regional level wise, not as amazing, but it did still get a YCS top, so you can never count them out. On the other 2 to 3 deck section, you know, Orcus, actually, I think one was with Sky Striker, the other was with Runic, so really cool. Sky Striker Orcus, definitely a throwback to like 2019 days, I believe. And then, of course, you have something like, you know, Sprite, Tier Elements, Chimera, they did get some new illusion stuff. Hasn't done amazing so far, especially compared to something like Branded Despia, where Branded Chimera used to do better than them. Rescue Ace, really kind of a perplexing mystery, because I think it's a good deck, but it just not many people really play it. Salad was doing pretty well leading up into this new format, like leading up to the new ban list, but so far, you know, a couple tops still. It's still pretty solid, of course, but I think maybe we got to give it more time. In the one deck section, that's where it gets really interesting. You have Blackwings again, not necessarily new. It actually topped not that long ago as well. The Buster Blader one, I recently provided a profile with that. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but I think that's super sweet. Drytron, this was with the Voiceless stuff, but of course, you know, Ritual support. I guess you might as well throw that in together. Hero kind of always sporadically gets tops here and there. Infernite was also cool. It was like mixed with the Snake Eye Diabellstar. Vanadium has really fallen off, of course. You know, Barone hit, something like generic stuff like that really does hurt them as well. And then you have Paleozoic, back-to-back Paleozoic tops for Yuri. Both of them on my channel as well. We'll talk about that later. Phantom Knight kind of comes here and out. I'm hoping to get this deck profile soon as well. Sky Striker, I've also provided that. This is from Montreal Regional, so you know what, they got engaged to 3, so it's kind of nice that right from the first weekend of Legacy Destruction format and post ban list, it was able to get a top. There was a Spellbook Runic as well. This one topped the same kind of concept topped a few months ago when I also provided a profile with it, and he actually said that Jordan, who topped with this event, was the inspiration for this list. So really cool. And then of course Tri Brigade as well, which is definitely a throwback as well. Now, in terms of the deck playstyle, we actually have a beatdown strategy kind of coming into the mix now at 15%. Basically, this is all Tenpai decks going second, kind of OTK strategies. It hasn't really been in the mix in terms of my breakdowns for a while, just because there hasn't been many beatdown OTK strategies. For example, the last time that was actually meta relevant where people were playing a going second OTK strategy was Dinos, kind of in the early days of the pandemic, and this is when we didn't have any formal events, not even remote ones. It was really more so LCS luxury gaming events, and Dinos I remember doing very well, and they were considered tier 1 not for that long, but that was probably the last time we had a going second OTK strategy be meta relevant. So you know what, now we have that with Tenpai, and we're gonna have to deal with that for a little bit longer because they just came out and they're going to get more support, as I mentioned earlier. Basically, other playstyles kind of, I guess, indirectly just go down because, you know, a lot of the meta pie chart is being taken up by Tenpai. You have combo, like any kind of Snake Eye decks. Mid-range, I just kind of like, for example, Branded Despia, I think is a good example of a mid-range. Control is something like, let's say, like Labyrinth. There were, I'm also categorizing Yubella's Control. Let me know if you don't think that's accurate, but that's why it went a little bit up. Stun, technically went a little bit lower, I guess, purely from an overall representation standpoint compared to last time I did this a month ago, but at the same time, there are still a lot of decent number of stun decks topping. It still would be categorized as like tier 2, and you know, of course, when you have something like Snake Eye, I guess maybe this kind of became a byproduct where people were trying to at least win in a more cost-efficient manner. In terms of packages played, Diabell Star, Snake Eye, that kind of thing, you know, still, because most of the decks topping are Snake Eye Diabell Star decks, whether with Kashtira, whether or not, that's why it takes a majority, and all the other packages like Horus, Runic, Bestial definitely fell down a lot more this time around. It wasn't really that high to begin with, I guess, to be fair, just because, again, most decks that are topping are Snake Eye Fire King decks, or rather Snake Eye in general. So you know what, Horus, for example, this was also seen in that Buster Blader list. The Runic is really more so at this point just like stun decks, and then Bestial, this was also in the Buster Blader list, but you know, you don't really see much Dragon Link, at least not right now, considering especially like post-ban list. In terms of deck costs, I like to do this especially as the new format starts all the time. In terms of kind of like the cheapest price among the decks that topped the regional level events was actually like pure Fire King, none of the expensive stuff, so we'll kind of briefly cover that later. The expensive one, the most expensive rather, is pure Snake Eye. Not that surprising, usually it has involved that in the past as well. Median cost was about $540, so it's really not that much different than when I did this like last month as well, even though, you know, Snake Eye, I guess Snake Eye is still the most expensive deck. Yes, the cards kind of went down and up at some points, but it is still rather pricey. In terms of specific deck cost, Snake Eye, again, $880 is a median cost. This is actually a little bit higher, I believe, from the last month. So it was kind of going on the decline, I guess, with the ban list, because they didn't actually, I mean, they're still the best deck. So I guess that's why they kind of bumped up a little in price. Tenpai Dragon, of course, is kind of a newer one. It's interesting. It is interesting enough, it is still $500 for the core, while most of the deck core is like, you know, supers and commons. Unfortunately, the supers are still actually quite expensive. Trident Dragon, of course, takes a bulk of this cost as well, because it's like $100+. But the rest of it, you know, it has so much non-engine space where you can fill it with like cheap hand traps and decide that can be cheap as well. But unfortunately, just kind of like the Trident Dragon as well as the Pydras are a little bit on the pricier side. You have Voiceless Voice. They did get some new support, but overall, cost-wise, it has actually been pretty much the same as last format. And then we also have Melodious, pure Melodious at that. There were only 4 decks with cost info for this one so far. I'm sure we'll get more data as the format evolves, but at the same time, it's, I guess, kind of nice to see that it's not like super expensive, average around $330 for the entire deck. And of course, this is at this point, at least so far, kind of categorized as a tier 2 strategy. And finally, just to cover some interesting topping deck lists. First is the Pure Fire King list I talked about just earlier, in terms of being the cheapest one to top so far in this current format. And as you can see, it's really mostly just like structure deck stuff and just a bunch of non-engine. And you know, obviously it's ideal if you could have all the expensive Snake Eye Fire King stuff, but you know what, even without it, perhaps you can still have a chance if you can pilot it well. So next we have Buster Blader, which is of course super cool. I mentioned at the beginning of the video that I did a deck profile with Nicholas Ladas on this deck. You can certainly go check that out. I'll have it in the description down below. He's very loyal to this deck. I remember in the earlier days of my channel when I was doing Dueling Book top ranked players analysis, he was definitely one of those players, and he was on Buster Blader. This was sort of had a little bit of meta relevancy back in like the early days of the pandemic as well, especially when Dragon Link was tier 1, and Buster Blader is kind of nice against that. Of course, their main strategy is to just turn your opponent's monsters to dragons nonetheless, and just kind of have like nullifying effects with their boss monsters, but you know, very control oriented. And now they have like some of the horror stuff, some bestial stuff to supplement them, that something that they didn't have back in like 2020 when they were slightly meta relevant. So I think it's really interesting strategy. This is a deck that I personally almost picked it up myself way back in like 2019 or something. I ultimately ended up choosing Cyber Dragons instead, and of course we know how that turned out for me at least. But really cool deck. Definitely go check out that deck profile. And then we have Paleozoic. This is with Yuri Landsman, who actually, this is the most recent one, post-Legacy Destruction format. I had also done a profile with him just before this, just before Legacy Destruction, and he topped that event as well. So, you know, really cool. He does very well with like these kind of like control rogue strategies, basically. And you can again check out the most recent deck profile on my channel as well. And a big thanks to Yuri again for sending that list. But, you know, really spicy, a lot of 60 cards, and you just see all these like, kind of traps that you haven't really seen play much, so I think it's really sweet that he managed to top an event with some creative selections like this one. And then finally we have Melodious, of course, one of the more interesting strategies to look out for in this current format at a tier 2 level already, and this is a list that topped the first weekend worth of Legacy of Destruction format at Montreal, thanks to Steven, who also did a deck profile with me on my channel that you can check out. I think it's really interesting, has a lot of non-engine space as well. It's one card combo of Ostinatos, or whatever you pronounce it, is really insane. So I think definitely something to watch out for, especially even as a package as well. Anyways, guys, that was it for the regional report for the first couple weekends worth of Legacy of Destruction format. Anyways, I'm excited to kind of continue to do this as the format evolves, and let's see how the representation for some of these current topping decks change over time. Anyways, a big thanks to all of you for watching. Huge thanks to my patrons as always for the continued support, especially thanks to my newer patrons Eduardo, Matt, and Turn the Cog as well. Really appreciate it, and well, take care, guys.